Hello guys, it's me, Liliana of Meetup. So okay, I'm back to talk about the scholar from Nightreign. Is he actually Aldia, the elder brother of King Fenric? This question has been going around amongst Thor's fans, and most of all Dark Souls 2 friends. But we can't really know unless we dissect Aldia's story or lore and research on who he was or what kind of person he is. So in today's video I will use Loki's lore as a base for telling Aldia's story, because I think Loki's lore is the most comprehensive and well-researched lore text available. So without further ado, let's get into it. Aldia was the elder brother of Fenric. He was involved in the foundation of the kingdom that we know of as Drangleic. He was mostly a subordinate on helping the conquest of the region that we know. Previously, it was called Alkan and Fen, but both kingdoms was already in ruins due to prolonged conflicts between the both, and Fenric merely created his kingdom on the ruins of these two kingdoms. And to it was implies that the remnants of these fallen kingdoms had joined under Drangleic's banner. Drangleic succeeded Fen and Alkan and its fractured people, and they carried together again under the dragon's wing. Now back to Aldia again. Despite Aldia being the older brother of Fenric, he never took the mantle of king. He never really held a title or a peerage. Though most people in the region calls him Lord or Lord Aldia. The only sign of status he had is his huge mansion situated in the country's remote hinterlands east of the Shaded Woods. Aldia was evidently never been into things like glory, limelight of war, or politics. He prefers to pursue his own interests in intellectual part on wherever venture Fenric roped it into. Having earned himself the title of a scholar or researcher in the course of numerous medical experiments, Fenric Deersbagger was no doubt talented with the arcane arts. With that comes not just wit, but also curiosity. Sorcerer seeks to solve the mysteries in this world. Aldia expressed a certain love for the world he was born into, which he refers to as beautiful. Aldia demonstrates lot of interest, including the histories of lost kingdoms or civilizations. Aldia, in his research on the undead phenomenon, has shown a darker side and cruelty of this aiding researcher. He experimented on the undead in Bastille, and most of these undead are mostly citizens of whom had turned hollow. He did a lot of terrible things to the undead, experimenting on them in the name of the greater good. Even his brother King Fenric has been shocked by his brother's cruelty towards these undead or hollow undead. Both Aldia and King Fenric sought to know the cause behind the undead curse, but one cannot understand the undead curse without a thorough understanding of the profound mysteries of the soul, along with is the nature of life itself. And to understand something so fundamental, one must first be familiar with the variety of interrelated topics. Magic, fire, disparity, light, dark, and so Aldia eventually gathered wise men from all over to his manor, amassing various kinds of magic usages was Aldia's goal, all to help him study the dark side at the heart of the curse. As the kingdom continued to reach out for genius minds to help answer the undead question, those less experienced would then cultivate their knowledge, assisting a senior member already caught up with the resource results. With the manor secluded as it was in Drown Lake's eastern hinterlands, Aldia's research party was able to perform their experiments free of judging eyes, tempting them to be a little riskier with their methods. Even then, they wanted to keep things discreet, largely limiting their efforts to the back hall of the manor complex, always hidden by a pseudo-unlock mechanism. They experimented a lot of creatures that were native to the lands. A dove was mutated using aromatic ooze, and these mutated creatures roamed about inside the cage with acid pools. Then the man-eating ogres. Furthermore, the so-called reserves border on sadistic. The dissection tables throughout the secret ceremony building are surrounded by implements of butchers, thieves, and torturers. On that subject, we find spike wheel next to cages and blood smear. For an experiment, it looking more like torture devices. Human sacrifice. They assembled the tools for such brutality, which the mansions, rabbits, and guard dogs had previously devoured along with presumably their olives. Although that specific scenario is strange to imagine with such diminutive animals. In its seclusion, Aldia's manor was becoming a madhouse. The mansion's resort has been turned into a horror of madhouse, from petrifying people to ugly horrors that wasn't used ended up casually dumbed down. A pit into the dog pens, where the flesh of and bone of countless bodies, humans or otherwise, would be eaten or be dissolved in the acid. Something changed for the secretive scholars after Queen Nasyander entered the picture. When King Fendik returned from his northern voyage with his queen, Aldia was the one to receive the giants back in tow, their bodies among the corpses piled at the dumping pit. Knowingly or not, King Fendik had given his older brother more dead subjects. Regardless, his brother did intend for him to use their souls to make the golems with guilt, Drumlake Castle. Child's play after what the sorcerer accomplished with the ruined sentinels. Even after construction of the castle had finished, Aldia continued to make his presence known in the court. Aside from gifting many of his golem guards to the castle's security, The royal sibling, which made sure to use the king and queen's abode as another base of operations for him and his cohorts. Aldia was investigating ruins to learn about the past. Naturally, Aldia joined Fenrik on his expedition to the ruined lands of prior kingdoms. The older brother proves familiar with the threats of the sunken sofa, Sanctum City, from Tower of the Iron King. Elohim writes, the king was no expert, so he brought his brother along. While the expeditions failed to clear out the areas for more exhaustive study, they likely did put the Children of Dark on both siblings' radar. That curiosity is probably what drew them to investigate Manus. Through Aldia's investigation with his acolytes, and through the altar to one chasm beneath, the castle was possible discovered during construction. It is probably the mysterious monster woman who seemed to haunt their kings, like shadow which inspire more than cursory dive into the black hole. They look at enough souls per light. Now was the time to examine souls for the dark. Suffice to say, there was no one on the continent that Aldia and Fenrik didn't look to learn more about the undead curse. These inquiries, with or without his brother, led Aldia to cultivate his interest in Anorlando. Besides his taste in decorations, the aging sorcerer had apparently become an avid collector of medieval memorabilia. Among the items, and the roaming dog hung as three Black Knight weapons, and the crescent axe, armaments which trace back to the defied capital in Lordran. We can also obtain the monastery set and scimitar from thief rock phantoms at the manor. It's armed with the broken sword and shadow dagger, while dressed in black letters save for the monastery road. There is a clear pattern showing that Aldia gradually hemmed in on Queen's Kingdom, the oldest of them all. Everything was tracing back to one source. And finally, he had his answers. From all this investigating, Aldia came to realize the fundamental principles to the universe and how they were manipulated to create the yoke currently binding man. The sorcerer also seems to have brushed up on the history preserved in legend and scripture, for he accurately surmises Gwen's connection to the undead curse. The King of Light replaced the natural order resulting in the Age of Dark with a new logic to preserve the Age of Fire, shackling the power of the Dark Soul, which every human bears by nature, and obscuring our memory. In our ignorance we enjoy the lie of our mortality blissfully, comforted by the God's grace, only to be unknowingly phrased in the reality of that falsehood, when the dark lurking within prevents us from actually dying. Fire eventually goes out and leaves behind only darkness, but in Gwyn-assistedness truth, the hopes of preserving his Apollo from the start. Thus, Aldia is a scholar of the first sin. However, knowing all this was just a means to an end for Aldia. The description for the malformed shell confirms that the man was more interested in learning the inner workings to life itself. And the text for his dissection books similarly confirms that he and Fenrik's paths eventually diverged. If the king wanted to simply be free from the curse, fine, but Aldia saw the bigger picture during his increasingly repulsive bits. He had answered how and why humans can uniquely live on past death, something which anyone might reasonably conclude to be a blessing. It was only because of quarreling that the dark side is considered to be a curse. The karma stemming from that medial's meddling. What then if Aldia found a way to overcome this karma? To rectify Gwyn's sin, man would then ascend beyond his mortal coil while liberated of its limitations. And so the researcher of the original sin pursue avenues to this end, him and his followers committing no shortage of atrocities in the process. During the course of these horrors, Aldia's discoveries made him curious about the dark in itself. Soul Geyser is a sorcery which unleashes a massive ghost of souls true to its name, Soul Torrent, something he had left behind rather than inherited. This was a sorcery created by the man himself, but while it is one of many spells learned at Aldia's mansion, this one is uniquely called a secret art, as if its existence was kept particularly hidden among those invented in the Mano's secret ceremony building. Indeed, we can only acquire instruction from a skeleton crawling in the ink of hand, potentially a trusted colleague who interrupt use in others' experiments before being dumped in acid. Aldia was particularly concerned about this spell leaking out. Why? Because it would beg question about his piety. In his attempts to overcome the dark side, Aldia eventually embraced the dark directly, performing experiments which ultimately resulted in the forlorn kiss bones of the first sin invade us as dark spirits, confirming their connection to the antithesis of light to the dark side. But unlike the other phantoms, they cannot return to physicality. They don't even have actual bodies, just an empty suit of armor with no face beneath a hood. They are forever phantoms wandering, a world as perceived by others, attacking without purpose. This is because these wandering spirits lacked individuality. They have no self with which to recognize their own world, keeping them untethered from reality without a place to go. They simply exist outside of time and space, manifesting only their equivalent and only incorporeally. This goes far beyond the typical use of dark magic. How did Aldia achieve this? Human sacrifice, of course. This frail experiment was a transparent attempt to have mankind transcend the limitation of this world. On Aldia's part, the nature of the Forland would allow them to be free of the curse while still retaining eternity. But in experimenting with ways to correct grins for sin, the resorter himself tried to make humans which defy the world's logic. Hence their existence is forfeit to his surefire disappointment. The only use the Creator had for these abominations was keeping a couple as guards, summoned upon lighting the select torches across the manor in a kind of ritual. As nothing else, this failure proved that Aldia had to work within the existing universal principles if he ever hoped to calm the curse. But after he finished exploring some of these options, the man had lost the support of his country. Vendrick eventually discovered the full extent of the mansion's blocks. Perhaps rumor had spread of odd happenings and disappearances surrounding Aldia's keep, and numerous ogres wandering as far-flung as Shrine of Amana and things betwixt proved that experiments did escape into the wild. Perhaps the king had grown suspicious seeing some of the creations, not all obviously resulted from non-human willing participants. Perhaps his wise subtly prodded him in the hopes of driving a wedge between the two brothers. Their expedition together were making her true matter all the easier to discern. Whatever the case, Aldia failed to prevent his irate brother from tyranning the entire premises. If the sorcerer had tried to explain his rationale for their methodology, Vendrick would hear none of it. As far as the also righteous king was concerned, his older brother committed unforgivable evil. Nonetheless, the hypocrite would one day return to rely on that evil. If the king had hoped that confinement would make his elder brother reflect, he terribly miscalculated. Aldia's depraved rituals continue until the man himself suddenly disappeared from the public's record. While it is easy to imagine the sorcerer becoming subject to one of his own experiments from the outset, that truth becomes all the more apparent after meeting him in person. Aldia has become a twisted mess, branches and roots vaguely forming a phrase. A brace of roots is on fire. But despite appearances, the wood doesn't seem to actually burn, and Aldia is in no apparent pain as he converses with us. This is most likely because the wood itself is spalling from the flames, rising or descending from the ground wherever he may appear. Indeed, we find that Aldia tailors his form, shape, and size to his environment, and he can control and create more branches at will as demonstrated during his boss battle. The arboreal abomination has used the power of life, generating flame to give himself one, similar to the flame of scales, and its seedbed. He creates a head for us to engage with, for our benefit. Not his. He could probably shape it to be anything. Likewise, we don't receive any souls from defeating this boss, because what Miss Lowe was merely an avatar. The real entity is still actually capable of speaking to us as a disembodied voice. As to what fire would have the power to rival Scales' Lane, the obvious answer is the first flame. Aldia mostly manifests from undead bonfires, showing that he is connected to the network, and thereby the flame at the heart of it. At the same time, his appearance at the Throne of Wood confirmed that he isn't limited by the bonfire. It just seemed to be his most convenient points of entry. In that case, he has most likely weaved his souls into the fabric of reality itself, all of which has been permeated by the first flame. Not just his standard soul either. For the flames Aldia produces to attack or move have the same black and red color scheme as dark pyromancies. In other words, Aldia involves his own dark souls in process, perhaps even using his own dark sign to leapfrog off when linking himself to the original fire. The researcher's motive for his current state is easy to surmise. If he cannot exist outside the methods of creation, and he can at least be the one behind the steering wheel for it. Much like whole Fendrick muses about controlling the dark with fire. Aldia probably imagined the reverse: control fire, fear the dark. He had already proven that the dark could be used to transcend both mortality and physicality. And he wouldn't be the first resident of the New World to use dark souls for a kind of reincarnation. If his soul could assert control over a fixed flame, then he would be master over all it touches, akin to a god. And if this deity was pulling the strings binding the universe together, then he could theoretically manipulate the dark signs, curses, over all of mankind. This would explain why Aldia seemed to be the one and only person subjected to this experiment. Who else was he to trust with this mission except himself? The researcher attempted to achieve kind of apotheosis through light and dark. What we see is the end result. However, the karma-shackling man continues unabated, and Aldia acknowledges his failure. The slave answers to no masters. He is merely another cog in a machine comprising reality. While this doesn't seem to have affected the researcher's previous influence upon the universe, he can no longer go back to being human. This was his last best gambit at resolving the first sin on his own. One might argue that he has at least escaped the confines of the curse. But that wasn't his objective. Aldia expresses no interest in making his fellow men into monsters like him. He sacrificed his own humanity, both literally and figuratively, for the sake of freeing others from such a fate. He would have been the god who would bring an end to hollowing, allow men to enjoy paradise as men. On this front, all of his efforts have amounted to failure. So now he watches from the sidelines to observe if others can provide the answer he couldn't. The rest pretty much happens in your journey through Down Lake. Specifically in the Dark Souls 2, colon of the first sin. So is there any similarity between this colon from Nightreign and the scholar that we know of, who did terrible experiments turning his mansion into a madhouse in search on what causes the undead curse? Only then to realize that the curse was caused by Gwen her choice to shackle mankind to the fire, linking out of fear of the dark and committing the first sin by linking the fire with his soul to prolong the age of fire and preventing it from fading. Then he did an experiment to make corporeal being like the Forlorn to escape the curse or the cycle entirely, but it was a failure. Then Aldia was locked in his mansion, but then disappeared, and said to have turned into a messy branch of flaming treating. So, let's go into the comparison. Okay, it's post-edit Liliana here. I saw a similarity with the statue that exists in Bastille and in Aldia's Keep, with how the scholar looks like. The statue of Saint Paul from Saint Peter's Basilica in Italy. Ignoring the specifics, the figure is still bearded, philosopher and appropriately carrying a scroll in one hand. However, the other hand wields a sword, associating this wise man with war. Paul was a warrior of Christian faith and beheaded martyr. But a wise man is typically a shorthand for sorcerer in Dark Souls, and the statue otherwise only erected in the foyer of an actual one participants mentioned. In other words, the model in them most likely represents Aldia, and if he is the sage, then the statue's place in storage would implicate Pyro, with dwelling at the Bastille. So after I read this in Loki's lore, I remembered that what the statue looks like. I came to realization scholar is indeed Aldia. Look at the way he wore the robe. He's good with the sword, and he held a book on other hand. Just like the statue here, maybe except the statue holds a scroll. I get back to my non-edited one. Get back to continue. From looking at the eyes, nose, it seems to me Aldia is actually already getting old, or at least, getting like a old man vibe. But in Nightreign, I think Scholar is like a younger version of Aldia. There might be other truths that we can try to connect. So I studied the description of the video trailer, and it says below here, victory requires more than brute strength. To bring an end to the night, one must first understand its making. So this kind of sounds like, like the Aldia's pursue in, researching the ended curse. Instead, in this one, he pursuing to understand why the night happens in Nightreign, I guess. And the other text I found is from the website. The website only says, an academic who walks the lands between, boasting impressive arcane levels. He gains incredible advantages through battlefield observation. So, from what we know about Aldia is that he is indeed the expert on arcane arts, even in Dark Souls 2. So there's a connection there too. So the next evidence is a screenshot of from a user on Twitter. It says, to return for this first sin, we elect to become the foundation. I don't really understand this part, but yeah, the first sin though could be a reference to Gwyn, but I cannot exactly confirm it nor deny it, A scholar is Aldia or not? I think there's a chance that it is Aldia himself, like Aldia when he was younger, I guess, before the event of Dark Souls 2, or before the event of the undead curse, He might be just adventuring, I guess, and then found this little weird thing going on there with the Night Lord staying out the night, in Nightreign. So he was like, okay, this looks interesting. I want to study it. So he did join a group in Nightreign, the Nightreign gang, and then he was like, yeah, I will join you guys just to study this weird phenomenon, Something like that, It's probably just my tale, I think that was the story of Aldia, I guess. And the scholar from Nightreign might be actually Aldia himself. So we'll see when the DLC is out, of course. So for now, thanks for watching if you watched to the end. And of course, make sure to subscribe, leave a like or dislike, and may the flames guide your way.